Hi everybody, my name's Truman. I'm a recovering nicotine addict, and I am grateful I've not dosed myself up on this powerful drug of nicotine, and that's no joke. We have, and I use the term we, not I, because I could not do it alone. 10 months, 1 week, and 4 days. I want to thank you, Cindy, for the time that you've given me to speak, and sorry it's taken so long to finally get here. It's really a good week for me to be doing this because my friend died, and he was one of the most spiritual people I've ever met, his wife and himself. His name is C.C. Raphael. I'm helping put some of his talks up on YouTube. He died, and I'm helping with the memorial, and I'm helping his widow, his wife. And so going through the whole thing, she's a very spiritual person too. It's given me some insight into my own mortality. And I think that's one of the things that it's all about is because at some point we look back upon our lives and we decide, did we live it fully? And I think if there's one single thing that's just occurred just this week for me with helping with CC Raphael and his wife, is that truly want to live life to the fullest in what we leave to others and what our legacy was as a human being. And being self-obsessed in a dependency such as nicotine, and feeding myself instead of feeding myself spiritually, and feeding others and helping others in this world, and not just with dependencies, but with a sense of love in my heart, such as CC did, then I could come up far short and have horrid feelings when I reached the end of my life, and because I didn't live my life to the fullest. And I just want to touch on that. I don't want to make it my talk about that, but that peek into our mortality is really vital to understand how important it is to be able to live, for me, a full and a meaningful life. And I have to thank the 12-step programs I've been in, because that's exactly what those 12-step programs have been about. Instead of feeding myself with nicotine and other substances, to live my life by enjoying with others. And really, when you look at the steps and you look at what the process of recovery is about through working these steps, it's about enjoying with the human race, and it's about becoming more able to express myself and to be able to support others. And through supporting others, I'm supporting myself as a person, instead of isolating myself in that self-obsessed use of nicotine or other dependencies. It talks about okay, so let's go ahead and I'll just start my story now. That's kind of like the preamble for you there. So my story, I started using nicotine. Actually, it was like I heard Dan talk the other day, or a week ago was it, or a week before last, and he hit the nail right on the head. It was a conglomeration. It wasn't just that socially acceptable. Nicotine allowed me a window into drugs. It was more like it was part of the whole profile of that, the whole profile of the addictive profile, and it was something I could use in front of others, because you couldn't always, like, say, smoke dope or get drunk, right? So, but you could always use it. Nicotine, and that's why I believe it was so prevalent in my life, was because I could use it. It was socially acceptable, somewhat, especially back, a few decades ago. It wasn't ostracized the way it is today. So you could do it anywhere at any time. And I used to do it at work. I would have a cigarette at work, and at the same time I'd have a dip in my mouth. And I went through life pretty much like that, using nicotine. In one form or another, or both at the same time. and I never really tried to quit until I addressed my alcoholism. And my story also contains that. So if you don't want to hear it, then you have to put your fingers in your ear. So the first time I addressed it, when I went into treatment center, and I said, well, can I go ahead and can I get a prescription for Nicorette? And I was 28 years old. and I got a prescription, and it seemed to work. But I chewed through that gum really quick, and so I was off for like maybe it was like 4 or 5 days. And I point to that as the first time I ever really, if you want to call that success. And I mean, and I'm not demeaning anyone's attempt, and I shouldn't demean my own. So that was what I point to as my first attempt to quit using nicotine. And no sooner did I get through that gum than I started right back again and said, "Oh well, I just, it's not worth it. I can't do it." And I look at back on this stuff today about those times that I tried to quit and I couldn't quit, and I really believe that a lot of that self-esteem, failure of self-esteem to have self-esteem, is due to fighting something I'm powerless over, and being powerless over nicotine, trying to quit and not being able to, and failing time and time again, and then eating myself up with my own negative self-talk. It just demolishes any kind of positive accomplishments working on my own self-esteem. In a sense, I guess that whole powerlessness is not only just the use of that nicotine, but it invades every part of me as a human being, including my self-esteem. It just kind of, in a sense, possesses. I don't really like to use that word, but it would possess me in every faction of my life. So after that treatment center, I continued to smoke and continued to use, and then I went to another treatment center, and then finally I got recovery. And then once I got recovery, I would get prescriptions for the nicotine. It was during the time when the Nicorette was a prescription, and so after I got in recovery, I still would try every few years on cigarettes. And then when I had like something like 10 years or something in Alcoholics Anonymous, and they started right in my neighborhood a Nicotine Anonymous group. And there's a lady named Jo that lived a couple miles away, and she would religiously show up over there. She's a very, very good 12-step person. And if I was to say one single person that helped me in my recovery, above all else, it was her that carried that message. Just like the first person in AA that told their story. And in that story, I could recognize and understand and relate and identify with that person that, I too had those problems. Same thing with her. Through her story, I got a peek into my powerlessness. And in both those stories, I just want to say, in any 12-step story, got to talk about the recovery. You don't want to just leave it out there that, oh man, you're sick, powerless, you're going to die. But there is possible recovery. And that's what I heard from her. And I kept going. She said, and this is what she would say, and I say it at the meetings here sometimes. She would say, just keep coming, and at some point, just like nuclear fission, you're going to hit critical mass. And at that point, you're going to be able to quit. And that's what I did. And then, yes, didn't have to use nicotine replacement therapies or anything else. I was able to quit, and so I was into my first quit, and I can't even remember the date on that, but I managed to maintain it for couple months, and I think it might have even been a year, and then I quit going because it was too much trouble, as if being addicted to nicotine wasn't too much trouble, right? But it turned out I talked myself out of it, and I quit going and started using again. And I remember one of the main things, it was like 4 or 5 months, and I stopped at a convenience store. I live out here in the same state as Dan, Arizona. He had talked about that in his talk. And we have these Circle Ks, and on the way home I stopped, and I kept working it, and this was like maybe 15, 20 years ago. I still can remember my mental processes in my head, talking to myself, and it wasn't my body, it was my mind that kept saying, wow, I can use this, and it's going to be okay, is because, it's like, and without actually saying to myself it was a drug, but it was going to give me a calming and a good effect. It was going to do something positive for me. And I stopped and I smoked, and I remember it was like sucking on a tailpipe of a car. It had been long enough to where it was just dry and caustic, and it just tasted horrid. But something inside me, in my mind, was pleased, call it a nicotine, which is kind of funny. But it was more like my psyche got its fix and once again was able to succumb to a force that was greater than mine, than me. And that force was a negative force, of course, right? And being able to surrender to something, to not have to be parental and be responsible. And I think that's a part of this whole dependency type thing, is not having to be responsible, right? That we can let that go, just like the way that anger works for us, or just fear, being able to run from it gives us excuse. And so I did succumb to it, and I once again for years started using again, and then I started developing bronchitis, and it was so severe. It was as if I was going to die. I really felt like I was going to die. I couldn't go to work for like 3 or 4 days. I took 2 or 3 regimens of antibiotics. It didn't work, and I would just lay there. And at the time, I was a single parent. My 9-year-old son would go get me water from the kitchen and bring it to me, and I'd lay on the couch and watch TV with him. And I couldn't even hardly move. I was so sick, and couldn't breathe. And I remember the window was right there, and it was before all the stuff where they're talking about how focused it is about not secondhand smoke. But I would smoke and blow it out the window so I wouldn't blow it on my son. And I would lay there like on a deathbed, crack the window, smoke that cigarette, and blow it outside at the very lowest level of my illness when I couldn't even breathe. And talk about powerless and the hopelessness and the unmanageability. Here are the 3 regiments of antibiotics. I still couldn't kick it, and here I am still bombarding myself with cigarettes. And so that kind of motivated me to continue to work on not using nicotine. I was still in recovery. I've been a recovered alcoholic for over 25 years, an alcoholic and addict. And so it just was like a thorn in my side. I could, by working the 12-step program, I was able to stop using alcohol and drugs. Well, by golly, I know it works, and it can work in all these, all my life's affairs. And so I continued to work it. I continued off and on using Nicorette, and continued using Skull, as if that's going to be a good substitute. Actually, it's probably even worse than cigarettes. It's just so much more orally gratifying. You actually swallow. Most people swallow the tobacco juice, so you're actually like even feeding yourself. My God, I thought about that stuff hitting your guts and what could happen. But anyway, that's another thing. So I continued on. My powerlessness escalated or descended, and I got less and less control, and then reached a point to where I just said, that's it, man, I'm going to really give it my all. I'm really going to quit. I don't want to be sick anymore. I don't want to leave my family prematurely, and we started having some problems, in the family and with my children. And I thought I got a disease that could have killed me. It wasn't cancer, but it was something that could kill you. And so again, like I spoke about at the beginning, it was there was a mix of mortality in there, and what my life was going to be about, and I didn't want it to particularly end at that time. So it was a combination not only of my physical illness, but the addition of using carcinogenics. I wish somebody could, at a regular meeting, you'd be helping me with that word, right? And so I continued to focus that I was going to quit that, and so I decided to return to Nicotine Anonymous, and I started going back. I said, "Hey, Joe," and she said, "Guess what? Years later, there she is." That's how stalwart that lady was. She's probably still over there, and it's been, I don't know, 30 years. Have to go see. Have to make it a priority to go see if she's over there. I was welcomed back, and I started working the program. She was my sponsor, and instead of using, I would call, and I can't tell you what benefit that is, because it allowed me to get out of my mind and into recovery, right? Out of my mind and into my recovery. And So I was able to once again quit. And then, so guess what happened? I quit for 6 years. And then, and this was back about 10 years ago, longer than that, 15 maybe, 12. Went to Las Vegas with my wife and my daughter and I think that was the time we went and we saw the Backstreet Boys. And I bought her two shows to see those. Remember the Backstreet Boys? I kind of liked it too. I hate to tell you, you'd be laughing at me, but and so I went with her, and my wife went to the next night to one of the shows with her, to see the Backstreet Boys. She was 13, 12 or 13. And when they went the second night, I went out and I was gambling and just catting around. And lady next to me was smoking Marlboro Lights. And I had like 6 years. I hadn't been going to Nicotine Anonymous for a couple of years. Again, same thing, repeating it. The insanity, right? And I bummed one. And I thought, it'd be okay. All the glitz and the excitement and the gambling and just all that high excitement, that non-content peace, in your spirit and your soul reaches out, that you're going to somehow get some kind of fulfillment out of all this glitz and all this excitement and stimuli. And so I bummed a cigarette, and and that one led to me getting a pack while I was there, because you could smoke anywhere in Vegas, right? Let alone inhaling it all the time, whether you're smoking or not. And so that led to a pack, and I smoked the pack, and on the way home I smoke out the window. My wife's saying, "What about the kids?" And there it goes, the selfishness, and just focusing on myself, self-centeredness, self-feeding of my own sick will, and without positive, and just feeding myself the negativeness of that nicotine. And then once again in that endless cycle of loop for the next 8 years. And to the point was, I had convinced myself in the last 2 years before this quit, that if I had just used the Nicorette, that somehow that'd make it all right. And somewhere in that mix, like 5 years ago, I started coming to Nicotine Anonymous here on Vonner. And so I'd come in, identify it myself. I'd have like a couple months quit, and then I'd lose it, a couple months back and forth using, and I would claim being free of nicotine, but I was using Nicorette gum, and I would say I was using Nicorette gum. Then I started getting these pains from chewing the Nicorette gum. I would chew so much, like I said, I don't use drugs or alcohol other than prescribed or aspirin or over the counter or and so I would come home on the weekend and I would sit here and I would go to a meeting online, 12-step meeting of some kind, right, online, and I would it'd be Friday, and so I would start popping these Nicorette gums like they were drinks or like they were drugs, and I'd wind up like chewing like 3 or 4, and then I'd start getting these pains in my upper digestive system. Like I was thinking, man, maybe I'm getting an ulcer or something. Then I'd start getting so dizzy, I'd have to, take off my headphones and go lay down for a while. The room would be spinning. That's how sickly addicted to nicotine I was. Kenny Mack talks to how, the Nicorette gum could be considered the crack cocaine of nicotine. And they say that kind of tongue in cheek, but there's some truth to that as well. So when I came in and I started listening to the recovery again and started regaining my focus, because the unmanageability in my life once again, I just didn't want to use it anymore, because I was once again afraid that I was going to cut my life short, and the mortality issue kind of thing. What am I going to leave in my life? I still had left my life so unfulfilled. I still wasn't retirement age from work, and so there'd be problems for my wife financially, and just everything. It just would not, just unmanageable to continue to use the nicotine. And so I kept coming back to these meetings, I kept giving it attempts, and then back in 2008, of course, so all that in the background as well was the economic collapse, and I went to school and I got my degree in around that same time in business management, and I took economics, and I kind of joke, but it's more painful the more educated you are to see these things occur, because you understand how uncertain it all really is. And the more I found out and the more educated I became on the economy and everything, the more fearful I became. And so I really had to start working the 12-step program much harder. So that's in the backdrop. I just want to kind of touch on that. So at the point when I finally got close to retirement age, and this was just, let's say, so last year, because I turned 55 in January and I could retire, and I got my degree so I could change jobs. All this stuff was occurring in my life, and I kept trying to push myself to go ahead and take the leap and retire. And I'd been applying for federal jobs because I'm a veteran for a year, from the September 2011 or before, 2011, I'd applied for jobs. And so then in 2012, I'd still not heard anything. I'd pursued jobs. They'd say I was qualified, but not forwarded, because I was utterly honest on my. They have this thing, knowledge, skills, and abilities, in their questionnaires, like 40 questions, and you have to fill them out, and then you're rated. So I was honest, and so I would be more. I would grade myself, if there was a question about my suitability on one of those questions and about the background that I did have in that, I would answer it one below, instead of one higher, and fudging it, right? Because I wanted to be really honest when I sat there and I interviewed. And so nothing occurred, and so I couldn't get it. So that was adding to my emotional uncertainty and to my fear as well, because I couldn't get a job. And I thought it'd be kind of easy, because then I got my degree. I had 30 years of experience. I had a couple degrees, associate degree in electronic technology, and the business degree. And I had prepared myself in order to do this, and yet nothing came of it. And then in the backdrop, all this economic insecurity, I got really fearful, and I was too scared to retire. And so I decided, you know what, man, these promises are just not working for me. And so I decided, son of a gun, I'm going to start working these steps again. And then also my shifts were changing. I went to graveyards, so like from 11:30 at night to 6 in the morning. And then for 6 months of that, and then after 6 months of that, I went to weekend shift, and it was 12-hour shifts, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And so it was like, all this change was occurring in my life, and I started gaining weight, and all this other thing was happening because I'd really been fitness training myself and trying to, overcome the negative feelings I was having. And so then I started throwing myself into working the steps. I said, I'm just not going to live my life like this. And thank God, and thank the 12 steps of the various programs that there's a solution for when you get like that, And what it was is I was just living in fear. So I started throwing myself into working those steps. And this time, after 25 years in the program of AA, I did it because I wanted to milk everything I possibly could out of those 12 steps. It wasn't just for the relief, because I wasn't using. I was just using nicotine. As a matter of fact, that was one of the things I'm going to mention here. But I just didn't want to live with that kind of uncertainty in my life. And there was a hole in my faith. They talk about a hole in you, right? That it can only be filled, a God-shaped hole, right? And I really don't believe that, because I think we're complete, and I think I need to work on the things that make me feel like I'm not complete, because I am whole. I think without saying I'm whole, without any of the other stuff, I'm whole. And it's just a matter of me to understand that, and I have to change my thinking, and like it talks about in literature, I have to change my mind, not the circumstances. I can meet any circumstances. So I threw myself into working these steps, milking everything I could out of them, and shared it. And one of the main things when I did the 4th step was that I did see how I was turning to other people to try to make me feel complete. and how that hole in me was all about, a lot of it, not all about, but a lot of all my problems was because I expected other people to accept me. And so that was pride. And when they didn't, then I wanted to punish them, and I wanted to retaliate. And so a lot of that anger and that fear and all that is very Al-Anon type based, codependent, reactive type stuff. And it's about me not feeling good enough. And I already said, I think a lot of this whole alcoholic and nicotine, this dependency thing, is about fighting something I'm powerless over, and failing time and time again. And it's just a big bruised, ego, because I'm trying to do something that's impossible, and then beating myself up about it. So that's what I learned about working the fourth step, was that it was just me wanting someone else to try to make me feel complete. And when they didn't accept my overtures to friendship, to relationships, or trying to get what I want, right? Does that sound familiar? And not getting it, then I would react to those others, and I'd want to retaliate, just like it talks about in literature. So my shortcomings, and I used the 12 by 12, by the way. So if you want to censor me, I used the 12 by 12 in AA, and it approached it from the 7 deadly sins, and I had them all. The main one was pride and fear, like I just mentioned earlier. And so then when I did my fifth step, before I shared it with the sponsor, okay, so in my fourth step, well, let me add this. I put nicotine down as a shortcoming because it was one of the most important things in my life at that time that I could stop doing. I didn't have control to stop. So it was one of the, just like the fear that was controlling my life, the nicotine was controlling my life. And if you remember, the reason I started reworking these steps and everything was because of that fear of economic insecurity and all the uncertainty. So this nicotine was one of those things that was also in that whole backdrop, was causing those feelings as well, because I was powerless over it and there was nothing I could do about it. And that was like a constant cacophony in my mind, along with all this other stuff. I just didn't have peace. I talk about peace and contentment, a wellspring of joy. I didn't have that. I didn't know it. And I know why. It's because of the cacophony of these dependencies constantly. In very subtle ways I don't even know, and unsubtle ways, right? So looking at that, putting that shortcoming, nicotine, as a shortcoming on there, that was one of the main things. And then the next, and one of the most important things that I found out with God when I did the fifth step, was all these other times that I'd worked the fifth step, I never really had focused that part on God, other than doing like the third step prayer or asking God, the foxhole prayer kind of thing, right? Oh, help me, God. I'd have prayed daily, meditated daily before, but I never fully, if you look at the fifth step, admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs, So if you look, I looked at it like in its totality, what I was trying to accomplish here, and these shortcomings and the nature of my wrongs, not just on each individual one shared to a sponsor, but in its totality, like you're reading a novel, and then afterwards you reflect on what that novel said, and you remember a few things that were the most important elements of it. Kind of like my friendship with CC, and the mortality of it all, right? And in that, I had never fully admitted my wrongs to God, to the true nature of my wrongs and what they were, okay? So I wrote a letter to God. And in that letter, I have it around here somewhere, I'll share it with you if you want one day, is about a page long, legal size, and in it, what it says is throughout my whole life. From the time I was a child, I grew up religiously. I was Southern Baptist, got baptized and all this stuff. When in my teenage years, really got involved with, drugs, alcohol, all this nicotine. And occasionally would go to church. As a child, I always went to church. Teenager once in a while. Then, as a troubled adult with a child, I knew somehow that God was a solution. And I would go, and I would even go church hopping. There's a Baptist church I'd go and I'd attend the sermon, and just as they were winding down, this Pentecostal church would start its last half hour closing, and I'd zip around the corner in my car, leave a little early from the Baptist so I could go hit that other one. I knew intrinsically, inside me, God was a solution, but I just didn't know how to apply that. And so I wrote this down, the true nature of my wrongs. I'd never fully committed my life to God as a child, as a teenager, as an adult, and through the whole of my life. I never fully committed myself to God, or what I did to God. I'd only used Him on the side. And I can't emphasize that enough. I tried to use Him instead of doing His will. And so when I wrote that letter, and I admitted the true nature of my wrongs to God, and it talks about in 12 by 12, and in that 12 by 12, that at some point along this process of these steps, working the fifth step, you're going to feel the presence of God. And when I set that down after I read that letter, when I'd finished it and I read it and admitted it to God, I felt a sense of completeness I'd never felt before in my life. And that's why I say, and that's what, that we are complete. And it was just my not understanding that. And it talks about that further, that we need to learn to meet the situations in our life. That's what it's about. It's about me committing my life to God instead of using God. And that's what I found. And then the other thing was an acronym I used because fear, which was the main impetus of me reworking these steps, that it was about the fear in my life. And it talks, and the thing is that it talks about how we ask God to remove our fear in the midst of doing our inventory, so we can do a fearless moral inventory. We ask God in the midst of doing the fourth. We ask Him we do a seventh, to remove our fear so we can do a fearless moral inventory. And so, looking at my fear, which was a motivation for me, I put down the four main things. And it sounds like I contrived this, but it formed the acronym SANE, S-A-N-E. S, then these were the roots of my fear. S was for sloth, not doing my responsibilities. And an example I like to use is I have a little Chihuahua. We have 4 dogs. 2 of them stay in the back pen because they'll fight with the other ones. And one of them is a Chihuahua. And those little guys are just so neurotic anyway, right? Anybody got a Chihuahua, you know what I mean. So totally neurotic. And I want to walk him every day, because if I don't, I'm afraid he's going to get cabin fever, and I don't want to do that, and that's torturous. Who wants to be in prison? Even the prisoners get an hour outside, right? So I take him. So sometimes I would just torture myself because I'd be too lazy, and I know he's in there, and I want to do my responsibility, and I wouldn't do it. And so that's where a lot of that fear would come from, as well as not doing my responsibilities, right? Sloth, S. A is not being satisfied in my accomplishments. To be able to come out of addiction and alcoholism with the help of the 12-step program and God is truly a miracle. More people probably die of these diseases than ever recover. So it's a miracle in itself to be satisfied with my accomplishments. If nothing else, I've managed through this 12-step program, your help, people in 12-step programs, and a power greater than myself, to have a life I never had. So, let alone, I was a high school dropout. I went because all the fear and the uncertainty in my life. I've always kind of been a fearful child, shy child, really fear, and a broken home, and I never brutalized, physically, sexual stuff. Traumatic life. never managed to accomplish it. Dropped out of school so I wouldn't have to show up. Well, I managed, so if nothing else, I managed to come back, an associate degree in electronics, managed to get a bachelor's in business management, and this was just 2007, so relatively current, so I could get another job after I retire. So I need to be satisfied with my accomplishments. So first, root of fear, sloth, not doing my responsibilities. I need to do my responsibilities that I set out to do in a sane way, right? So sloth was the first root. A, not being satisfied with my accomplishments, was the second root. N, not being in the now. And I love it. This is the most important element. And I heard Ray talk about it the other day as well, about living in the moment. And that's what helped me to stop using nicotine, was to be in the now. And it wasn't even stopping for a day. It's just not using for a craving. Because I couldn't even stop for a day when I came in here. It was too fearful to think of living without nicotine, even for a day. So being in the now is so utterly important. And some people may not like me mentioning the set-aside prayer, but there's a lot of prayers. Some people really wouldn't like you saying the Lord's Prayer, but that's your own business. And that's something else I wanted to touch on, but I probably won't have time, about my own spirituality. But so it's sloth, not doing my responsibility, root of the fear, not being satisfied with my accomplishment, and not living in the now. And when I think of the set-aside prayer, what it says is to set aside everything that I already know, because I'm relying on my experience and I'm not living in the moment when I do that. So I need to set it aside. And when I hear that, it cues me. It cues me that I don't want to use the past. That's why I work the steps on it, so I can shelve it and use it as a frame of reference instead of living in it, right? We don't live in it. We open ourselves to the new experience of today. And when I'm obsessed and I'm depressed, it's because a lot of times I'm speculating on tomorrow and what I'm going to do, and it's fantasy. So I let go of the past and I let go of the future, and I embrace the now. And when I'm living in the now, I'm living life to the fullest, which was the whole purpose of me stopping using nicotine and everything else, and what I began talking about at the beginning of this talk. And that is my own mortality, and my friend C.C. Raphael. And so what I want to say is, when I do, living my life, and throughout this whole process, I would succumb again and again to the powerlessness of these dependencies. And the ultimate pain of these 12 steps, the ultimate pain of these dependencies is because the darkness is of never fully being able to contribute to your highest level. So because you're going to be packaged by these dependencies. And to never fully be able to reach my highest level of contribution is the saddest thing of what could have been. So by working these 12 steps, by unleashing myself from this bubble of ego, it allows all these things to occur, and I believe it's that simple. It's not about going out there and working. It's about aspiring, but leaving the results up to a power greater than myself. So a lot of that is by me stepping away from my own barricade. Just like in the 4th step, we remove those obstacles between us and other people, and us and a power greater than ourselves, so that we can tear down that wall, so we can receive this from people, from other people, and that grace from a power greater than ourselves that can expel these obsessions and these dependencies. And we were blinded to that because we didn't know about the love of others, and we didn't know about the love of God. And that's what I'm talking about. The saddest thing is to reach the end of our lives, for me, to reach that end of my life. And that's what C.C. Raphael and his death and helping his wife, and I'm going to his memorial tomorrow, Sunday. Today is what? Today is March, so I put it on the recording, March 6th, 2013, and it's Saturday. And his memorial is Sunday. And the saddest thing is not to have been able to break out of the package that these dependencies have put me in, and to reach my highest level of contribution. And You know what that is? And to be able to do that, that's receiving God's love. Love is defined by me, and I learned it from Scott Gregory. Is it Gregory Scott Peck, the man who wrote The Road Less Traveled? He was a psychiatrist, Harvard-educated MD doctor, and I like his definition. His definition of love, and I use it for my own, is wanting something or someone to reach their highest level of contribution and to allow them to do that. And so then if you look at that as love, then you would see darkness, or you look at that as light, then what would darkness be? Darkness is to thwart or prevent. And that's what the dependencies did to myself. That's why it's not love, and that's why self-love is an important aspect of it, is because allow myself, by moving my ego out of the way, by working these steps, these 4 steps, and letting the process of life and interrelating with others, and letting the process of love of others, and understanding that I don't need to obsess on the imperfections of others or myself, but I need to embrace myself in with others to help shoulder this joy and the suffering of all of us, to reach that highest level of contribution, to intermingle, to not be isolated, to not be self-obsessed, to feed myself spiritually, and to feed myself with other people and interrelation, and in the joy of enjoying in each other. So being in the now is so fundamentally important to get the fullness of life, instead of being self-obsessed in fear, because that's the step back, or depressed in feeding on myself because I'm worried about these things and I have these looping thoughts. One of the best ways for me to break out of that whole thing is by looking at this frame of reference of that past that I had and shelving it and no longer being in that, by working these steps. I can't emphasize that enough. Meditation, and just even like a per se, there's a meditation. Bill Wilson in the 12 by 12 talks about a meditation, but he kind of has an object in his mind. A calming meditation is what I like to use. And I let go of the past, I let go of the future, and I focus on my breath. And if I do, and you got to do it every single day. And when you work on that and you do that and look it up, and it's not, you don't have to be intermingled with any kind of religion. It's just more of a psychological type of thing that you can do to give yourself respite. Then you're going to see that what I saw was that truly I was just looping on those same negative thoughts. And that's about being in the now, is not thinking about it. I'm going to close on this particular part by just saying a lot of the people in the meditation circles will talk about how we think way too much, and that's all I can say about that is, yes, think way too much instead of living in right here, right now, what it's about in interrelating. We think way too much about other things instead of actually practicing interrelating with what we're doing now. So, the roots of the fear. Sloth was the first one. S, the acronym saying. S, sloth, not doing my responsibilities. A, accomplishment, not being satisfied with my accomplishments. If nothing more, just being in recovery is a miracle. N, being in the now. So utterly important. If I am living in the now, I'm living to my life's fullest. And E, the last of the acronym, and the last root that I'm going to talk about fear, is enough. Is being satisfied that I do have enough. I have enough of everything I need today. And all these interrelate. If I am in the now, I have all the time I need, I have all the money I need, I have all my needs met. But it's just that speculation and that fear that causes me to feel like I don't have enough. So centering on these particular things as being the roots and understanding that they're just shortcomings was very important for me. And then also working the process that ultimately all these outcomes are up to a power greater than myself. That I don't have to be that neurotic, sick person by thinking I'm going to work all this out. And it becomes, it's no longer the issue, but the thinking becomes the causation of the pain. the trying to figure it all out becomes the problem and becomes far greater than the problem ever was or the issue ever was. So I got to learn how to set that stuff aside and categorize, and just put that stuff aside and let it happen. And talking in these 12-step meetings is one of the most important things. So in closing and in conclusion, I like to say that because the end is here, so you don't have to hang up on me now. But in closing, I'd like to just say that the 12-step programs, without a doubt, have saved my life. That today, I want to contribute. Today, I used to think serving was a bad thing, that I was going to have to be responsible to do something. But it's actually a beautiful thing to be able to serve. We serve a power greater than ourselves. We serve others. I was able to serve today and have the privilege of talking here. And I even still today get a little bit nervous, whatever. And what is that? I just talked about it, right? What was it? And I kept fighting it off, and it worked. And you know how? I let it go. So instead of fighting it off, I just let it go. Why? Because it's not about being in the now, and it's exactly what I'm talking about. Reshift, going to be okay. And the longer we practice this program, the longer we practice turn it over to power greater than ourselves, the more able we are just automatically to pull ourselves into the now. And that's where the relief occurs, because we understand we are going to be able to adjust and to adapt, and we will be able to handle whatever happens, because we're not the ones that are going to have to pound it all out. We do our part, we aspire, we work towards our goals, but we're not the ones that are going to wring that rag and make it all come out. We do our part and leave the rest up to that power greater than ourselves. We leave the rest up to other people that are in responsibility, and we learn to trust. The opposite of trust is control. So if we're trusting, we're not going to be controlling so much. And how do we do that? We do that by talking honestly in these meetings. We do that with talking honestly with God. We do that with being honest in our relationships. So, in closing and in summation, I thank all of you, and I thank C.C. Raphael for what his legacy has been, and all the loving people, because the bottom line was he always had time for everyone, and in itself, and in that context, that truly was love. And it's not just the beauty of what he would talk about in the spirituality, but it was the beauty of his life, and taking time to get to know others, taking time to let them know who you are, and taking time to communicate and give that energy to God and receive that energy, because it's about the love. And being able to serve others, is the beauty of serving others is not about if it does stir or cause any kinds of feeling of trepidation, like speaking or whatever, let that go, be in the now, and speak from the heart and live from the heart, and not in a hateful way, but only in a loving way. And if you and so when people talk about from the gut, make it from the heart, not the gut. And if you live in love, you're going to be able to handle anything that happens. Thank you. And I thank you all. And thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Sorry it took me so long to get to the point to where I made this talk. Well, that's about all I have to say today. And so I want to thank you all once again. And thank you, Cindy, for having me, for the privilege of being able to share my story. My sponsor always said that's the most important thing I have in a 12-step meeting, and that is my story. And then what I like to add is just make sure you talk about there is recovery, and there is recovery today. Stick with it. Thank you. Love you all. Keep coming back. It does work. Go ahead.